Hi, greetings everyone. I'm Addison Pollock, Director of Community Engagement with AARP Indiana. Today's conversation, we will draw attention to a critically important issue, housing instability and the eviction crisis in the city of Fort Wayne. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated housing instability and eviction filings in all Hoosier communities, but especially in areas where this issue was already prominent. Whether you are a renter or a concerned neighbor, you won't want to miss today's discussion. After a brief presentation, AARP Indiana volunteer Betsy Kachmar will lead a panel discussion with 3 representatives from organizations working on this very issue. We're fortunate to be joined by 3 local representatives, Andrew Thomas, who is an attorney with the Indiana Legal Services Incorporated, Kelly Lundberg, Deputy Director for Community Development with the City of Fort Wayne's Office of Housing and Neighborhood Services, and Pam Brookshire, Vice President of Community Services with BrightPoint. I want to thank everyone in advance for being here, and I want to remind live viewers that you have the ability to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can submit those in the comment section if you're viewing on Facebook. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and go through our quick presentation here. Just a moment. Okay. All right. So, as you know, today we're talking about housing instability and evictions in Fort Wayne. Advance here. When most people think about AARP, they probably don't think about housing, let alone evictions. But actually, housing is a critical issue to what AARP hopes to achieve with its Livable Communities initiative. And what we believe is a livable community contains a range of housing options. This means that residents of all backgrounds, income levels, and ability levels can find housing that meets their needs. AARP's policy book has some helpful information on this issue, talking about rental housing and how it's an integral part of the housing equation in our communities. Roughly 1/3 of US households rent, and actually older renters are more likely to face housing cost burdens than those in other age groups. Furthermore, a recent study found that half of rental households headed by someone age 65 years and older spend at least 30% of their income on rent, and over 1/5 of folks in this age group spend at least half of their income on rent. Housing problems can result from not only high housing costs, but inaccessible home design features, disrepair, or a combination of all 3. Excuse me. I now want to talk about an excellent resource. It's Princeton University's Eviction Lab, which is a database that covers all things evictions, providing some helpful statistics and as well as some just thorough background on the eviction issue in the United States. So I'm painting some really broad strokes here with eviction basics. So this is a really complicated issue, but I'm trying to level set here so everyone who's watching can kind of understand what we're talking about. So what an eviction is, it's when a landlord expels a person or people from a property he or she owns. This is a landlord-initiated involuntary move that happens to renters. Most evictions happen because renters cannot or do not pay rent, but landlords can evict renters for several reasons, such as taking on other boarders, damaging property, causing a disturbance, or breaking the law. However, in most US cities and towns, landlords can evict renters even if they have not missed a rent payment or otherwise violated their lease agreement. These are called no-fault evictions. And there's a lot of more information on evictionlab.org. I encourage everyone who's watching to check out that website. It provides more information on the eviction process, how it impacts people's lives, and who it affects most. It's a really valuable information tool. Now, when I talk about, we're joined by experts in Fort Wayne. I want to talk about the issue that's occurring in Fort Wayne, but also Indiana. So this is 2016 data. In Indiana in 2016, we experienced over 31,000 evictions. That's around 86.8 evictions per day, with an eviction rate of around 4.7%. An eviction rate is the number of evictions annually per 100 renter-occupied households. Going on, let me see here, here we go. With the top evicting large cities in the United States, unfortunately, Indiana has 3 of its major cities in the top 20. This is according to 2016 data. South Bend ranks at 18, Indianapolis not far behind Fort Wayne, with an eviction rate of 7.39 in 100 renter homes are evicted annually in Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne experienced more than 3,000 evictions in 2016. That equates to about 8.3 evictions per day. So these two graphs compare eviction rates in 2016. You have in the orange is Indiana on the bar graph on the left, Fort Wayne in the middle, and then the overall United States eviction rate. And then compare that with the line graph on the right, which shows eviction rates over time. All this is available on evictionlab.org, which is really helpful. I don't expect everyone to be able to read these charts, but Eviction Lab also produces these helpful information charts that breaks down demographics on evictions, as well as what the poverty rate is, the percentage of folks who are rent burdened in that particular area. Just produces some really helpful information. And then this graph is just to kind of show that eviction filings per week, showing where there was the Indiana moratorium from March 19th through August 14th. As you can see, in mid-August, there was a spike in eviction filings, and that was right before the Centers for Disease Control order halting evictions in early September. And that is still in place, I believe, through the end of this month. And then just another helpful piece of information, there have been more than 35,000 filings, eviction filings since March 15th of 2020. And then this is also a really helpful graph showing what average filings are in the purple versus filings this year. So in the purple, these are non-COVID times. This is, and then orange is the filings so far, January 2020 through December 2020, and then January 2021, further on the right, going forward. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Kachmar, who's going to go into our panel with our excellent guests. Thank you.
Thanks. The first excellent guest that we're going to speak with is Andrew Thomas from Indiana Legal Services. And Andrew, can you tell us a little overview of the federal moratorium on evictions, and what does that mean, and what's the future timeline?
Sure, and thank you for having me here today. There is currently a federal moratorium on evictions issued by the CDC. It started back last September, has been extended several times. It is currently set to expire at the end of the month. There is the possibility that it will be extended again. However, no one will probably know that until a few days before the end of the month, when the CDC gives more instructions on that. Under this moratorium, what should happen is that there should not be any evictions for non-payment of rent in any of the states. However, we just saw that graph about eviction filings, and it clearly shows that there are evictions happening in Indiana despite the moratorium. One challenge we have seen as attorneys is that each county and really each judge is interpreting how to handle the moratorium differently. There is no universal interpretation of how we are going to deal with this issue. For instance, in Allen County, the judges will treat the moratorium as a defense. So the landlord can still file for eviction. They still hold eviction hearings, and the tenant can provide the moratorium as a defense. A major difference in this moratorium from the one that happened at the beginning of the pandemic last year, where no evictions could happen at all, is that this moratorium requires the tenant to do an affirmative action. It requires the tenant to fill out a form, sign it under oath, and provide it to their landlord. Probably be the biggest difference there. So there is this protection for tenants, especially for non-payment of rent in Indiana.
Whoops. How would people get that form?
There are several ways. You can go to, for instance, to our website, for Indiana Legal Services. There are forms available there, including the tenant declaration form is what is called. And all you have to do is to, basically sign and print your name and date it. If you give it to your landlord, you should also keep a copy for yourself, because again, that does not necessarily by itself stop any eviction. It simply provides a defense to it. You will need to show and attest to several things on this tenant declaration. One is that you have used your best efforts to try and get all the government assistance that is available to you. So you would need to apply to the various assistance available, such as township assistance, emergency rental assistance, and so on. You need to show that you make less than $99,000. You need to show that you've been affected in some way, such as by loss of employment or emergency medical costs. Interestingly enough, this moratorium does not require that your loss of income or financial hardship actually be directly related to COVID. That is actually not a requirement. You also need to show that if you were evicted, you would become either homeless or be forced to live in close quarters with others. And there's an expectation that you continue to try to make as much a partial payment to full payment, and to continue to abide by your lease or agreement with your landlord as much as you can while the moratorium is active.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, it's my understanding that, and then the reason that we have the three of you on today is that there is an effort to better coordinate services between the Indiana Legal Services, the City of Fort Wayne, and BrightPoint. And that was, I guess, in the works even before all of this happened. Can you, maybe from your perspective, give me a little history on how this teamwork has evolved and what you see for the future in terms of being able to provide some more unified assistance for folks?
Sure. Even before the pandemic started, I would say about over a year before the pandemic started, Fort Wayne and the organizations that you've just described, the city, ILS, BrightPoint, the townships, and others, we all work with folks who have issues keeping housing, with having affordable housing, with dealing with an already apparent eviction crisis. Again, the Eviction Lab did rate Fort Wayne 13th in terms of evictions. And we were seeking to find solutions to that problem. We had created a task force to come together and try and work out what could we do to help out with this eviction crisis, which again was already happening before the pandemic. And like many things, the pandemic just stressed that there already was a problem, and it had made it worse through the pandemic.
So Kelly or Pam, do you have anything to add about the partnership from your perspectives?
Okay. Thanks for having me on today. I would like to just kind of tag on to what Andrew said is obviously the data shows that evictions have been an ongoing issue for the state of Indiana and especially in Fort Wayne. The pandemic obviously exacerbated that issue. It did provide us some good opportunities. And so we were actually working towards identifying programmatic and education type solutions to the issue. And we were trying to figure out how we could fund some of those things. And then the pandemic happened, and the silver lining to that was we did get additional funds from the federal government, and we were actually able to push forward on some of those initiatives and plans that we had kind of been hoping and dreaming of being able to do. And so as of now, we've had in the eviction tenant legal aid clinic for what has this been, Andrew? About 6 months, maybe.
It coincidentally almost coincided with the CDC moratorium. I would say we started in earnest about August, September with the legal clinic.
Pam, do you have anything else to include?
Well, as Kelly said, the amount of funding that was finally brought into the community to allow us to finally put a dent into the problem. Not only did the city receive additional funds, but BrightPoint as a community action agency, we also received additional funds to address COVID relief and pandemic stressors. So we were also able to provide a lot more financial relief than we ever have been in the past. So, and it's been a godsend, and we're very blessed to have it. And then just the relationship with the city and with Indiana Legal Services, the three of us trying to work and address tenant issues as much as we can. You know, Andrew and I have certainly worked back and forth on a couple of sticky tenants' rights issues that the best that we could. I've certainly learned a lot, and as Kelly said, and Andrew too, COVID has really stripped the curtains off this whole issue and exacerbated all the problems that low-income people are having, regardless whether it's housing or any other income-based situation. Tenants' rights issues, as far as I'm concerned, you know, all the fallacies that we have as a community, thinking that tenants are protected from the law, all that has been ripped away as far as I'm concerned. COVID has certainly changed our lives, but I look at it as a blessing in that everything that should have been exposed years ago has been exposed, and maybe we all have an opportunity to advocate and address and get some of this stuff changed.
That's excellent. So Kelly mentioned the Tenant Assistance Legal Clinic, and Andrew, can we go back to that and talk a little bit more about what kind of services people can get from the clinic, and kind of what are some of the the big issues, and how many people have you been able to serve so far, and that kind of those kind of nuts and bolts.
Absolutely. We started the Tenant Assistance Legal Clinic, or TALC if you need an acronym, last fall. And this clinic provides legal assistance to tenants in various forms. We can provide simple legal advice. So say you just need to work something out with your landlord, or you have a question about your rights as a tenant. We can provide that simple legal advice. We can also provide negotiations, and such as creating agreements with your landlord, or working out problems with your landlord. And finally, we also provide assistance in court, and represent people in eviction court. And sometimes we will also handle other tenants' rights issues, such as damages hearings, or other issues involving housing. as the screen is showing, or just showed, you can apply by calling 260-424-9155. This will take you to the intake process. The best times to call are 10 to 2, Monday through Friday. And once you complete that intake, a person will be provided more information on, and someone will help them to solve their legal issue as a tenant. We have had quite a bit of success with this. I think we've had over 200 clients in this clinic since last fall. And we've seen all sorts of issues. Many of the cases, again, because it coincided with the beginning of the CDC moratorium, has been helping people to be placed under the protection of the CDC eviction moratorium. However, we've also seen a lot of cases involving what they call self-help eviction. Now, before the clinic has started, before the pandemic, I might have done 1 or 2 self-help evictions. Now we've seen a lot of self-help evictions. Just this is when the landlord tries to do things like change the locks, turn off the utilities, harass the tenant. This can be somewhat predictable in that landlords become very aggravated, very frustrated with the moratorium. If they feel that the tenant isn't, pulling their weight with the rent, they try to do these other unlawful, really, means of eviction. And we've seen a lot of that. But the vast majority of cases remain to be non-payment of rent. We have been assisting people with those issues through the clinic.
One of the things that has happened in a variety of areas, not just tenant rights, due to the pandemic, is a suspension of rules or an imposition of a moratorium, those kinds of things. From your perspective, what are some tools in the toolbox that you have now that you would like to keep and make more permanent? And maybe what are some tools that you wish you had from a protection standpoint that could be enacted, at whatever level of government those needed to be? What's your wish list to make that work better for folks?
So some things we've seen, not just during this pandemic, but even before, that would help tenants are protections such as some sort of ability to expunge your eviction record. The truth is that the very filing of an eviction case can hurt a tenant from getting future housing. Very much depend on how the landlord looks at an applicant for housing, a rental application, housing application. Because Indiana's records are completely public for eviction cases, a lot of landlords we've noticed will simply just see that there is a case and not let that renter rent the space simply because that case is open. It won't matter if the eviction is dismissed or if the landlord was incorrect. It may not even matter. So one major aspect of the wish list would be some sort of expungement ability or record sealing of evictions. Another protection that would be helpful is more of an ability for tenants to protect their rights in terms of things like habitability. In other states and areas, you may be able to, as a tenant, withhold rent if your area is uninhabitable. It is much harder to do that in Indiana under the current laws, and the ways that are available, even by admittance of judges, are extremely difficult for a pro se tenant to do correctly. The CDC moratorium, of course, has been extremely helpful in buying time for tenants to come up with the rent, but it also shows a weakness in tenant protections. And this is a very technical part of my wish list, but there's technically a 10-day notice requirement for non-payment of rent cases, but it's almost useless because of all of the loopholes around it. And many judges simply won't recognize it as a defense. So the idea is that you're supposed to tell a tenant 10 days before you file that, hey, you need to pay the rent or I'm going to file for eviction. You have 10 days to fix it. But there's no practical application of that. There's no enforcement of it, and there's too many ways around it. So it becomes useless.
While we're dreaming, Kelly, Pam, do you have any other things on a wish list that we can add?
Do you want to go, Kelly?
Go ahead, Pam.
Well, one of the things that I would like to add, and Andrew, you're going to have to help me with this because I don't know the technical term, but you know when eviction hearings are held at the attorney's office, that's got to go away. As far as I'm concerned, all hearings should be held at the courthouse where, you know, tenants can be heard by a judge and not by the attorney that's representing the landlord that's evicting them. That's horrific. My other wish list would be that all this money that we're seeing right now, that would continue. That would be nice so that we actually have real cash to help people with the problem. I echo Andrew in that habitability standards, eviction filings falling off records because they stay with you forever, as he said. Bankruptcies come off after 10 years, but evictions live with you forever. That is certainly something that we deal with on a daily basis as far as trying to help people find permanent housing if they have an eviction on their record, especially at this time when housing availability is so limited. It's almost impossible to find somebody with an eviction that we can put into permanent housing. We've actually paid off old eviction filings so that we can move people into permanent housing. Things just have to change. I don't know. I had other stuff, but, and I'll have to think about it, but I really, for me, the whole thing of tenants not really having rights, and I know that Andrew and the staff that he works with work really, really hard with people that come to him and ask for assistance, but there are so many people that don't come to him and ask for assistance that show up for evictions and get evicted. Andrew has talked about all these telephonic eviction hearings. There's no understanding of the system for the people that they're dealing with. You know, they have phones that have limited minutes. They have jobs that they just can't take off 2 hours and wait for their name to be called when it's their turn for their hearing. They get evicted for not even showing up for their hearing. There's just all kinds of horrible things that happen that, as far as I'm concerned, are infringement on their civil rights. But it doesn't stop them from losing their housing. And there's a question in the chat about ramifications for a landlord evicting a family with small children and endangering the children. I don't know. I'm not the lawyer, Andrew is, but as far as I know, no. Landlords don't have to consider any of that. If they're evicted, they're evicted. If they've been given a date to be out, they have to be out regardless of the circumstances. So, go ahead.
Yeah, when you'll even hear judges talk about this in the hearing. They'll say, this is such a horrible situation. We're so sorry for you. The law says you can be evicted. So if you did have like 7 children and they're going to be out on the street, that's not something the law is considering. It's awful, but it's not what the law is considering. So those people will be able to be evicted and there would not be much of a consequence on the landlord. I also want to follow up with Pam about what they call the accounts or claims calendar hearings, to explain that, at least in Allen County, not every county actually allows this or does this, but in Allen County, and in some other areas in Indiana, if you're an attorney for the landlord, at least, you can, instead of having a proper eviction trial in front of a judge, have a hearing, just either telephonically or possibly at the attorney's office or in a cubicle of the small claims court, but not in front of a judge. And if you don't show up or call the attorney, you'll be evicted. And if you do show up, you'll still be faced with an experienced landlord or landlord attorney who often is there simply to make you sign off on what they call an agreed judgment, which is basically an eviction judgment. And you still get evicted. You're told to leave in 7 days, and people are pressured into these agreements that don't help them at all. And it's not it's not a good system for the tenant, especially. It's simply allowing for a conveyor belt for more eviction.
So Kelly, you are welcome to add anything on your wish list, but then I'd like to move to something a little more positive, because this is getting depressing. And could you talk about the emergency rental assistance program? Because that's good news.
Yes, that is good news. I think as far as the wish list, mine is really broad and kind of envelops, I think, a lot of what Andrew has already touched on. But what my perspective from the city and from the eviction task force is, we would like to see people at the Indiana legislature actually put their thumb on the scales and at least balance it out a little more in favor of the tenants. In fact, as recently as a month, 6 weeks ago, they overrode the governor's veto and basically tied the hands of Fort Wayne and other state municipalities to set any sort of ordinance or guidelines for what our expectations are of the relationship between the landlords and the tenants. And everything that they pass is very heavily tilted in favor of landlords. And I think that's why you see the eviction rate so high, and why we have 3 Indiana communities so high on the national list is we as a state favor landlords over our tenants. And I would just like to see at least it be a little more balanced, if anything. And so for some positive news, we received almost $8.1 million of emergency rental assistance through the U.S. Department of Treasury. I think it was officially, we were notified back in January. So we actually opened our application process for that program. It'll be 2 weeks on Monday. And actually, was just looking. We have an online application portal that people can access, but we also have really great partners like Pam and her staff at BrightPoint for people who need a little more personal assistance applying. But right now, as of this exact moment in time, we have 710 applications that are under review for that program. We have another over 900 that are in some sort of a draft form that hopefully will be submitted. We anticipate that we'll be able to assist anywhere between 1,000 and even maybe up to 1,800 households with that first allocation of assistance. Through the American Rescue Plan, we also anticipate receiving sometime, this isn't formally, but another allocation of emergency rental assistance funding, which we can use to cover rental arrearages and ongoing rent. We can also cover utility assistance for renters. And we really think we're gonna be able to really help and impact a lot of our families here in Fort Wayne.
And Becky, just for me to add, sorry, the counterpart to that for Allen County residents is the IndianaHousingNow.org website. It's the same program, run a little differently, but the Fort Wayne program is simply for the citizens of Fort Wayne, but there's options for the Allen County residents as well through the Indiana Housing Now website.
And Pam, if you want to go ahead and continue on and talk a little bit more about what BrightPoint does, and not even just in Allen County, but you cover all of Northeast Indiana. Basically.
Right. Well, we have services in 26 counties, but our main services are in the 6 counties in Northeast Indiana. What we have specifically had available for rental assistance, utility assistance during the pandemic and always is we've had great donations from the consortium the United Way of Allen County has put together with foundations. We've had some private donations. We've had other foundations that have donated funds to us to help us address the needs of citizens affected by COVID. We have been part of the state emergency solutions grant, COVID relief, where we have helped about 160 households with over $600,000 and rental arrearage relief. And we've been doing all this since August, and we've had additional funds from our current federal partners that have provided us with COVID relief. So since the middle of summer, BrightPoint has been assisting people with rent, with utilities. We've provided some transportation assistance, some medical assistance, a little bit of childcare assistance, all related to the pandemic and trying to help people get over the worst part of it. With the extension of each moratorium, people's bills have gotten, what they're owing landlords has gotten higher and higher. And it's not unreal for us to see people owing landlords $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 by this time, because the moratorium, really has been in effect for a year. The utility moratorium, not so much so, but the rental moratorium, very much so. And I'm sorry, Andrew, but I thought I read where the moratorium had been extended till June 30th. So I must have read that wrong.
Strangely enough, we looked into that. I think you probably saw that on maybe the court's official webpage. That was a typo.
Oh my goodness. I've been telling people wrong then. I'm glad you said something.
Maybe they will, but that was not correct.
Okay.
So, wishful thinking, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And during this time, we always have the energy assistance program, which is utility assistance. We're still taking applications for that program. We'll be doing that until May 14th. So if you haven't applied yet since November 1 of 2020, you still have time to do it, but please get your application in because we would love to be able to provide that assistance if you're eligible. But, BrightPoint has a deep reach. We have programs for veterans. We have we have Head Start, Early Head Start, program for juniors and seniors in high school called JAG. So we provide a lot. We provide a lot of assistance to various age groups, and we want as many people to contact us as they can, so that we can try to help them. And if we can't help them, then refer them to one of our great partners who might be able to.
We talked a little bit about the hope that there would be some special exceptions for people with large families of children. I guess because we are an organization that cares specifically about seniors. What's the impact on seniors? How many people are over 50 that are facing evictions or coming to you for assistance? Or let's talk about the grandparents of some of those children and how is this affecting them?
We've seen grandparents affected in a couple of ways. One, they're getting custody of their children that they were not, or grandchildren, and they were not expecting that. and expenses for that. They were barely making it, just taking care of themselves. So now all of a sudden they have 4 or 5 grandchildren to feed, and they might be living in a 2-bedroom trailer or a 2-bedroom apartment or whatever. So their expenses have taken off. We have assisted a couple of grandparents that have fallen far behind on their rent under that situation where, unexpected grandchildren have come. Where we've also run into issues with grandparents is they may not have custody of the grandkids, but because of virtual learning, the grandchildren are coming every day to stay with grandma and grandpa, or grandma or grandpa, and are being fed by them, are getting help with, homework, virtual learning, electricity costs are going up, all these things that nobody was expecting and nobody could really prepare for. So they're having a COVID, they may not have COVID, they may not have even been exposed to COVID, except they went and got their vaccine, but because of their family situation, they're being directly economically impacted by COVID. So we are addressing both those issues. But it has been, and we've also seen some disabled people who, were barely making it. One, they had little part-time jobs that they lost during COVID. So the thing between them and not being able to afford their rent was that little part-time job added onto their little bit of Social Security or SSI, and they could meet their expenses, lost the job. Now they can't they can't afford where they're living. So they were economically impacted by COVID. And so they fell behind on their rent and their expenses. And so we've been helping that kind of situation. So it is, COVID has been, a very equitable situation for everybody. It has affected every household, every type of income level, and people, again, no way to prepare, no way to even think about it. So everybody has had to find some way to adapt. I think the seniors that have had, the grandchildren left with them for whatever reason, I think, based on one of the things that we have been doing since COVID hit is providing a lot of hotel stays. And for people, the shelters were closed or drastically cut back on their census. So it was one way to make sure that people weren't on the streets during the height of the pandemic. We've seen a lot of drug abuse, a lot of mental illness. I mean, we always knew those were effects, problems among the homeless, but it's really come to light during COVID. And if parents are struggling with those 2 issues and they've got children under tow, they can't take care of them and manage their addictions or their mental illness at the same time. So grandparents all of a sudden have grandkids to take care of, and it's really sad. But we've been very fortunate in the last 10 months that the funding has been there so that we can help address these situations and try to make life a little better for everybody.
Thank you. So I'd like to switch back to what can we do, and going back to your wish list. We mentioned SCA 148, where the Senate and the House overrode the governor's veto of a bill that would restrict localities to be able to put in some tenants' rights controls. There is a bill, Senate Bill 150, that is in the House Judiciary at the moment, which is headed by Representative Tor, that is supposed to address maybe the most egregious part of that, where it would not put a global restriction on all local controls. And that would be one thing that people could do, would be to make an effort to contact their representatives. At this point, even though it's a Senate bill, it's over in the other House, Senate Bill 150, that could help correct some of the governor's concerns about SEA 148. So that would be one thing. What are some other things that people could do that would help you help others? Whoever wants to go first.
I would encourage people to let people know a rent need utility or rental assistance, to go to the website for our emergency rental assistance program. I said we do have a lot of applications in, but we anticipate being able to help a lot more. The website for our program is the link shown is long but works. We also have fwcares.org. That takes you directly to that page with information about our emergency rental assistance program and the apply here button. And it also has the information on how to contact our partners on that program. So I would ask that you please spread the word to people who that you think might need help, and encourage them to go check that out.
And just what you said, Becky, contact your senators and ask them to please vote for that bill. At least get a start, because, and Andrew, again, is the lawyer. I'm just a citizen that wants things to change. Kelly's right. We need to make it more equitable between tenants and landlords. And I am one that feels bad for landlords, okay? We have asked them to sacrifice for the last year. We've said it's okay for you to go unpaid for the last 12 months. That's not right either. But we need to, on the back end of that, while we offer their sympathy and try to make things right by them, they need to give a little too and let tenants have a little more say in how they live and give them more protection against really bad landlords that don't treat anybody very well.
Andrew, you have anything else to add?
I would just piggyback on what Pam's saying, is that what we've seen, there's some weird things that we've seen throughout this pandemic period. And one is, for instance, landlords who just won't accept money from other sources. We see that a lot. They won't accept the rental assistance, which can be very disheartening for the tenant, but also a little mind-boggling when you're trying to negotiate and you offer the money and no one will take it. We've seen that as a problem. And we've also seen the problem of refiling. So even if you have a case dismissed, the landlord may be able to just quickly refile, find some other reason to get rid of the tenant and have them evicted. So maybe they couldn't do it for non-payment of rent, so they find some other breach of the lease. And we're seeing that a lot. As far as getting assistance, if you're a tenant, we highly recommend that you do it very quickly. Don't wait until a few days before you're going to be evicted. I wouldn't even wait until I would even get help before your landlord files for an eviction, since it's the filing itself again that can do the most damage to your record, especially.
Good advice for everyone. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Let's go to those here. One specific question was, have we looked into reasons for eviction filings, and do we have data on that? What's the number 1, 2, 3 number of reasons for the filings when a landlord would file for an eviction? What's the cause?
I mean, I don't have hard data yet for that time period, but the usual experience is that the vast majority of eviction cases are for non-payment of rent.
Even now, still, with these additional resources that are available, that's still the number one probably, or we don't really know yet because it's still too soon.
What we've seen is that even if it isn't the reason stated in their notice of claim with the court, it usually actually is about non-payment of rent. We have quite a lot of litigation where we have to argue that this maybe some other breach of the lease is just a pretext, that it's pretextual, that the landlord really just is angry that they are behind on rent, not for this other breach of the lease.
Right. So a good follow-up question to that then is, how long does it take for an applicant to get the funds from the time that they would apply to when the landlord would actually get payment?
So I would say we're shooting for 2 to 3 weeks. Obviously we've got 700 and some applications that we got kind of all in one fell swoop. So that's going to take us a little while. I actually have hopes that maybe as early as next week, we can start issuing some of these first payments. And just to kind of circle back to the point that Andrew had made about landlords not accepting assistance, we have found that in some of our other programs that for whatever reason, the landlords are just not willing to accept assistance for their renters. This program, our emergency rental assistance program, actually allows us, in the event that the landlord declines the assistance check directly, that we can provide that assistance directly to the household, to the renter household. So that is something new and unique to this program, and I think will be really helpful.
That sounds like something that we should keep. We'll put that in our toolbox wish list too. So the last question that I see is about the possibility of extension. When it does finally get extended to June 30th, how will we find out about that? Is it going to be a big banner across fortwaynecares.org? Is that, how will we find out that information?
I've just usually caught it in some of my news feeds. I can't say that it's ever actually been in an official declaration, but Andrew and Kelly are closer to that than I am.
So when you know, how do we know? How do we find that out? Will it be in the paper? Will that be big enough news?
Well, since I've already spread the news that it was June 30th.
Well, let's go with your news. I like it better.
Well, yeah, but I don't want people to get evicted because I said that on. When I find out, I share with, there are multiple groups in Fort Wayne that are dealing with housing and homelessness issues. So I make sure that I share that news with, all my staff, all the groups that I'm affiliated with, the Regional Planning Council, the Coordinated Entry Steering Committee, everybody that I know that that deals with homeless and housing issues, I get that out. I can certainly share that with you and Addison, but like I said, the last time I read that in the paper, in the Journal Gazette. So I took that for gospel, and obviously I was wrong.
Okay, well, I'm sure that Addison will help us get that information out to you. Addison, do you want to close up? I think we don't have any more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say thank you so much to all the speakers today, and thank you, Betsy, for leading this conversation. As you can tell, there's a lot of layers to this issue. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different levels of government that are interacting with this issue and regulating it. So there were several resources that we shared throughout the program. So if you're interested in taking further action or sharing the word, getting the word out on those, feel free to rewind. This program will be available on our Facebook page going forward. And an easy first step for you to further draw attention to this issue and raise awareness is to share this video and just share some of the resources that were talked about today. And Betsy had pointed out that Senate Bill 150 is in the House Judiciary Committee right now. If you'd like to contact your state legislators about that bill, feel free to do that at iga.in.gov if you're interested in looking up more information about that bill. Those are a couple ways that you can help this issue. It's a huge issue. There's a lot of layers, but you have a lot of the contact information of our speakers today if you'd like to help out or if you'd like to seek more information. But with that, I just want to thank Kelly, Andrew, and Pam, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We're glad the emergency rental assistance funds are hitting households, and that we're making progress there. Thank you all, and have a great day. Take care.